Okay, everyone, Shabbat Shalom. And we are continuing our journey in the Biblical Prophecy series. We've covered quite a lot of ground, actually. I realized we covered loads of ground. And last week we covered the book of Daniel, specifically the 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel 9. Now, when we went through that, I gave an exposition of it that kind of goes against the what's currently being taught out there as a whole. We saw this switcheroo that had happened where they've made Messiah into anti-Messiah, and where they've, added in a 2,000-year prophetic pause button right in the middle of it. And we kind of went through this, that the only way you can do that is if something's already in the house, if some ideology is already in the house. And, I told people, go look at where futurism came from. And I gave you the name Rivera, if I'm not mistaken, the Jesuit, and how all that was part of the Counter-Reformation. Now, by looking at Daniel 9, this is in modern eschatology, especially in Christendom, they tie this all in with the abomination of desolation. We've all read, the abomination of desolation is spoken of in Matthew 24 and Daniel 11, and Christendom will put Daniel 9 in with that. Now, obviously, we put Daniel 9 back into its proper biblical context. So that leaves us with a couple of questions, well, what is the abomination of desolation and such things? So this is what today is going to be about. Now, many people will state that the abomination of desolation mentioned in Daniel 9 is the same as that of Daniel 11. Now, if you look at Daniel 9, it doesn't actually say abomination of desolation. It says on the wings of abomination there will be one who lays desolation. So, and again, like we saw how the Hebrew has, they've added in words into the English translations, and they've done this switcheroo. Now, many people will look at Matthew 24 and Yeshua's statement of the abomination of desolation and link it to Daniel 9. Now, Matthew 24, Yeshua does mention the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. But here's the problem. We've already established that Daniel 9 has nothing to do with the anti-Messiah whatsoever. So what is Yeshua referencing that's the abomination of desolation as spoken of by the prophet Daniel? Also, we established that the temple of Elohim post the death of Messiah is the body of Messiah, i.e. we are the spiritual temple. Now, this segues really nicely into what we're going to be covering today, because we will be covering the abomination of desolation and what that truly is in light of what we covered in part 6. So yeah, this still leaves us with the statements of the abomination of desolation in Daniel 11 and Matthew 24. So again, these prophecies have been heavily influenced by leavened futurist interpretations, leading to all sorts of confusion. And again, remember what I said way back in part 1. Part 1 gives us the reason why we have all this confusion and all these denominational understandings, because unfortunately his people have been praising him with their lips and keeping their hearts far from him, and the result has been that the spirit of deep sleep has been poured out on the prophets and the seers and the people as a whole. And lo and behold, we have all the confusion that's being sown today. So today we are going to look at Matthew 24 and Daniel 11. And again, like we did with Daniel 9, we're going to put them back into their proper biblical context. And hopefully it will clarify some certain issues in regards to our Messiah's words. So let's just jump straight in. Matthew 24. And going out, Yeshua went away from the set-apart place, and his taught ones came near to point out to him the buildings and the set-apart place. And Yeshua said to them, "Do you not see all these? truly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another at all, which shall not be thrown down. And he sat on the Mount of Olives, and the taught ones came to him separately, saying, say to us when this shall be, and what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, if you compare this to the Mark account, you'll realize it was actually Peter, James, and John. It was his three that came to him separately, asking him for this. But notice there are three questions being asked by the disciples. Say to us, when shall this be? So what are they speaking of? Well, what Yeshua said, do you not see this, that not one stone shall be left here upon another? So speaking of the destruction of the temple. The second question is, what is the sign of your coming? And the third one is, and of the end of the age. So there's three questions here. Now, we are still awaiting his coming and the end of the age, which means that these three questions have actually spanned almost 2,000 years. Now, knowing that there's these three questions, that means that what Yeshua is answering these questions. Now, the problem is, you read Matthew 24 and you think, well, which bit applies to which question? And again, people have, thought about this actually for quite some time and really wrestled with these passages. When one reads through Matthew 24, it's hard to separate what events relate to what question. Now, Matthew 24 is paralleled by Mark 13 and Luke 21. And each one of these will omit certain things or include other things that other passages haven't. Now, when I've looked at this, I personally think that Luke 21 lays it out in the easiest way to understand. Okay, so we're going to look at Luke 21 first, and then we're going to look at Matthew 24, because in Luke 21, it doesn't mention the abomination of desolation as spoken of by the prophet Daniel. It's not in there. But it is in Matthew 24. But Luke 21, well, as you will see, I find it's a lot easier to find out what statements Yeshua is saying and according to what question. So let's look at Luke 21 first. And as some were speaking about the set-apart place, that it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts, he said, these that you see, the days are coming in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. So again, the same thing. And they asked him, saying, Teacher, but when shall this be? And what is the sign when this is about to take place? Notice that they're not mentioning the end of the age or the sign of his coming. This is why you need to look at all three parallel passages, really. Now, we're not going to cover Mark 13 today. I feel that we can do enough of the groundwork with Luke 21 and Matthew 24. And he said, see that you are not led astray, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am, and the time is near. Then do not go after them. You know, this is interesting because we have a lot of doomsdayers and naysayers going on at the minute, and Yeshua's saying, do not go after them. You know, do not be, the things with these doomsday sayers and so forth, they like to stir up our emotions. And it's easy to let our emotions get the best of us and to essentially get hoodwinked. But when you hear of fightings and unrests, do not be alarmed, for these have to take place first, but the end is not immediately. So Yeshua is speaking about the end. Now, from reading Luke 21, you wouldn't know that Yeshua is speaking about the end of the age. Remember, this is why you have to look at Matthew 24, because there were three questions: the destruction of the temple, the sign of his coming, and of the end of the age. And notice here, Yeshua is saying there's going to be many people claiming to be either the Messiah or claiming. We'll break this down more when we get to Matthew 24. And that the end is near, the time is near. And he's warning them, don't go after them. And you will hear fightings and unrests. Do not be alarmed, for these have to take place first. But the end is not immediately. Now, this will make more sense when we look at Matthew 24. Then he said to them, Nation shall rise against nation, and reign against reign. And there shall be great earthquakes in various places, scarcities of food, and deadly diseases. And there shall be horrors and great signs from the heaven. Now, cast your mind back to when we were breaking down Yom Kippur, or the day of wrath, or the day of judgment. Remember that there would be great signs in the heavens on that day and leading up to it. Now, I also want to point out, great earthquakes, scarcities of food, deadly diseases. I believe that the scarcities of food and the deadly diseases point to the 4 horsemen of Revelation. What was one of the horsemen? One would be essentially famine, that food prices would skyrocket and that there would be scarcity of food, and that there would also be deadly diseases and pestilence. But before all this, so again, Yeshua, it's clear that Yeshua is talking about the lead up to, or the crescendo leading up to the end, because he's referring here to great earthquakes, scarcities of food, deadly diseases, and great signs from heaven. This is clearly speaking of the lead up to, the day of wrath. And Yeshua is saying, but before all of this, before all of that, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the congregations and prisons, being brought before sovereigns and rulers for my name's sake. Now, again, context, who is Yeshua speaking to? He's speaking to his disciples, specifically Peter, James, and John, because there's 3. I think there's a 4th one that comes in. I can't remember. But so Yeshua is saying, before verse 11, before the great earthquakes and the lead up to the end of the age, before all this, you, my disciples, will be persecuted, and you'll be delivered up to congregations and prisons. Now, again, we have the beauty of hindsight and historical evidence. We know what happened to the early Kahal. And even the book of Acts tells us, that the apostles were being imprisoned, and they were being beaten, and they were being brought before the Sanhedrin. So we know, and again, Yeshua is saying, but before all this. So he's now speaking to his disciples. And it shall turn out to you for a witness. Therefore resolve in your hearts not to premeditate on what to answer. For I shall give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to refute or resist. And again, we read of this in the book of Acts. And you shall be betrayed by parents and brothers and relatives and friends. And some of you shall be put to death. Again, we have the historical record of how the all but one apostle met grisly ends, like very grisly ends. And you shall be hated by all because of my name. But not a hair on your head shall be lost at all. Possess your lives by your endurance. By your endurance. Now, I will say that I believe these passages have a cyclical nature. I believe Yeshua is addressing his disciples. But as we'll see when we hit Matthew 24, there's a cyclical nature to this. And because we have the book of Revelation, we know, and we've covered this in this series, that during the 3.5-year Great Tribulation, the saints will be persecuted, those of the true faith. Now, what does it say in the book of Revelation? Here is in the endurance of the saints. And how do they endure? By the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their witness, by the witness of Yeshua. Here is the endurance of the set apart one. So I do believe that Yeshua, while he's addressing his disciples, there's a cyclical nature to this. And when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its laying waste is near. Again, this is clearly talking of the destruction of Jerusalem. And we have historical evidence, i.e. the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. Yeshua is being very clear. And remember that Yeshua is saying, before all the crescendo to the end, you will be persecuted. And we know that the majority of the apostles, like for example, the apostle Paul, he was around when the temple was still stood. Then let those in Yehudah flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the midst of her go out, and let not those who are in the fields enter her. Yeshua is saying, when you see armies around Jerusalem, leave, leave. Now, what's really interesting is when you study the conquest of, well, when you read of the conquest of Titus and him destroying the temple and so forth, the Jewish rebels actually were able to push back against the initial few battles. They actually won the first few battles, which means that the Jews would have thought they were winning. Now, do you think that those of the true faith would have listened to their Messiah's words, even though they would have thought that, hey, it looks like they're winning? Our master said, no, run, run. Because these are the days of vengeance, to fill all that has been written. So Yeshua is saying that this is actually going to be a fulfillment of prophecy, the destruction of Jerusalem, and we know that this is speaking of 70 AD. Now, did Daniel 9 foretell of the destruction of Jerusalem? We covered this last week. We saw, yes, it was. It says that its end shall be with a flood, right? And I made the case that that's speaking of the floods of the Roman armies, i.e., because again, the Roman armies came in multiple waves, okay? And again, Rome were losing the initial battles, but eventually they won. And Yeshua is saying, guys, this is going to be the fulfillment of prophecy. Do not, for those of you that are alive in those days, listen. Don't be fooled by you winning the initial first few battles. Now, what is the vengeance for? Again, remember that this is speaking of the days of vengeance to fulfill what has been written in the light of Jerusalem and the temple being destroyed. Now, in Luke 19, Yeshua says this, and as he came near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you only knew even today the matters for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. Because the days shall come upon you when your enemies shall build a rampart around you and surround you and press you on all sides, and dash you to the ground and your children within you. And they shall not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation. Now again, what was Yeshua saying to the disciples? The disciples are going, look at this temple, wow. And Yeshua saying, not one stone shall be left on top of the other. And the reason is because they did not know the time of their visitation. That Yeshua came to them, and as a whole, they rejected him. Now again, this ties in perfectly with what we covered in Daniel 9. Because what did we read? The Daniel 9 prophecy, it pointed literally to the coming of Messiah, to around 27 AD. And we saw that, Messiah would put an end to the meal offerings, to the sacrifices. And we saw how this tied in with some of the Jewish writings. The Yom Kippur sacrifice stopped being accepted 40 years prior to the destruction of the temple, around the time Yeshua, that the prophecy of Daniel says that Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. Again, and I believe that this is what Yeshua is speaking about. Like when he said that the days of vengeance have to be fulfilled. I believe that in speaking of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, he's specifically pointing to the prophecies of Daniel 9, which were all about the atoning work of Messiah, right? His high priestly duty. And because the religious system of the day rejected him, it has to be destroyed. It has to be judged. It has to be brought to nothing, thus fulfilling Daniel 9. I hope that makes sense so far. But let's keep going on with Luke 21. And woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing children in those days, for there shall be great distress or great tribulation in the earth and wrath upon this people. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because I believe Yeshua is pointing to the destruction of Jerusalem, but again, there's a cyclical nature to this. Those of you who know a bit of basic prophecy, if you read Daniel 11 and you read some places in Revelation, you soon find out that Jerusalem is not a good place to be in the end times. It's a very bad place to be. In fact, it's around Jerusalem that the great deception occurs. Now, it's really interesting because when it says there shall be great distress in the earth, the word here in the Greek, it can mean the earth. It can also mean the land. So you can actually interpret this in a twofold fashion. You can say that this is speaking of 70 AD, i.e. in the days of the destruction of the temple, hence in those days. And so there'll be great tribulation in the land. But again, the Greek is nuanced here. And Matthew, as we get to Matthew 24, we'll see that this has a dual-fold application. Let's keep going. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. Who? Well, it's this people, i.e. the Jewish people. Again, we know what happened in 70 AD. We know what happened in 70 AD. The Jews were cast out of the land and they weren't allowed to come back under the penalty of death. And that was actually one of the fulfillments of the curses of Deuteronomy. But that's a separate discussion. And Jerusalem shall be trampled underfoot by the nations until the times of the nations are filled or fulfilled. So again, I believe this is immediately speaking of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and the conquest of Jerusalem. However, I also believe the cyclical nature of this. We have the record of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD that shows us this was fulfilled. However, I believe these still have a future application due to the nuances of the statement that there shall be a great distress or a great tribulation. Because again, it can mean the land, but it can also mean the earth. It can also mean the earth. Also, this is further reinforced by cross-referencing verse 24. So let's look at this. Jerusalem shall be trampled underfoot by the nations until the time of the nations are fulfilled. Now, what is the time of the nations? People are scratching their heads. Go to Genesis 48 and the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh. And what does Israel or Yaakov do? He crosses his hands and he blesses Ephraim and he says that he shall be a multitude of nations. And Paul speaks of this, that until the multitude of nations are brought in. I believe that this is what Yeshua is speaking of, that the time of the nations is fulfilled. In Revelation 11, a reed like a measuring rod was given to me, and the messenger stood, saying, Rise and measure the dwelling place of Elohim, and the slaughter place, and those worshipping in it. But cast out the court which is outside the dwelling place, and do not measure it, for it has to be given to the nations, and they shall trample the set-apart city underfoot for 42 months. Now, in part 5, we looked at what this 42-month period is, or the 1,260 days, the 3.5 years of great tribulation. So again, I hope people can see the link here, that Revelation is telling us that Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot. Well, actually, the set-apart city, Jerusalem, shall be trampled underfoot during the great tribulations. So again, this is why I believe that Yeshua's statement here, woe to those who are pregnant and nursing children in those days. I believe it's a dual-fold application. First, to the conquest of 70 AD, but also speaking of the days to come in the Great Tribulation. Back to Luke 21:25, and there shall be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and on the earth anxiety of nations, in bewilderment at the roaring of the sea and agitation. So again, when are the signs in the sun, moon, and stars occurring? We saw that these are statements pointing to the day of wrath and the days leading up to it. Because the prophet Joel says that in the days leading up to these events and before, there shall be signs in the heavens. So Yeshua, again, now he's starting to speak more about the end. Men fainting from fear and the expectation of what is coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Again, this statement of the powers of the heavens being shaken, or the stars, the heavens being shaken like a fig tree. Again, these are statements pointing to the end of days. And then, if it couldn't be clear enough, and then they shall see the Son of Adam, or the Son of Man, coming in a cloud with power and much esteem. So this is clearly speaking of the lead up to his return. And when these matters begin to take place, look up and lift your heads, because your redemption draws near. Now, it's very clear. Okay, let me rephrase that. If you were to take Luke 21 by itself, without Matthew 24 and Mark 13, the only question that's recorded in Luke 21 is the disciples asking about the destruction of the temple. Now, people have erroneously put all of this passage to the conquest of 70 AD. This position is called preterism. The thing is they are partially right, because what Yeshua is speaking of is clearly about the destruction of the temple. But again, we're yet to see this Yeshua returning with great power and esteem, and signs in the heavens and the stars. And again, this is why you need to cross-reference this to Matthew 24, as we will do, because they clearly ask what, about your coming and the end of the age. Okay, the end of the age. We're still in this age. I'm still in a fallen body. Therefore, the age hasn't ended. Okay, let's now look at Matthew 24, having read Luke 21. Again, I believe Luke 21 divides it up really nicely. It's the clearest one of all three, in my opinion, to answer which statement goes to which question. And he sat on the Mount of Olives, and the taught ones came to him separately, saying, "Say to us, when shall this be? And what is the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" So again, notice the three questions. In Luke 21, it was the only question recorded is in reference to the temple. And Yeshua answering said to them, "Take heed that no one leads you astray, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and they shall lead many astray." Now, you can read this in two ways. You can read this as many people will come claiming to be the Messiah, or you can read it, take the parentheses away, because there's no punctuation in the ancient Greek, like in the Hebrew. You can read that as many shall come in Yeshua's name, saying that Yeshua is the Messiah, and they shall lead many astray. I believe we're witnessing this today. Many people using the name of the Son of Elohim in vain. And you shall begin to hear fightings and reports of fightings. See to it that you are not troubled, for these have to take place, but the end is not yet. So again, Yeshua is clearly speaking of the lead up to the end here. And this was evident again by what we covered in Luke 21. For nation shall rise against nation, and reign against reign, and they shall be scarcity of food, deadly diseases, and earthquakes in places. Again, I believe this is a reference to the 4 horsemen. And all these are the beginnings of birth pains. Now, what did we, in fact, I believe verse 7 is speaking of the 4 horsemen of Revelation. Cast your minds back to, was it part 5? Where we looked at where the seals and when the 7 seals are opened, and we saw that in the book of Zechariah, the 4 horsemen are already out and about. But what else did we say? That as the time comes nearer to the end, that there will be a crescendo. The effects of these will become greater and greater, an increase in severity. Then they shall deliver you up to affliction and kill you, and you shall be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Now, in the Luke 21 account, it made this more about the disciples and the days of the early Kahals, but Matthew 24 is kind of putting this in the context of the end of days now. Again, like we're seeing some of the cyclical nature to these verses. And then many shall stumble, and they shall deliver up one another, and shall hate one another. Now, as we'll see, you can cross-reference this to Daniel 11 and 12. So again, like we're seeing one of the dual application to these verses. Many false prophets shall rise up and lead many astray. And because of the increase in lawlessness, the love of many shall become cold. But he who shall have endured to the end shall be saved. Now we find this statement all over the book of Revelation in regards to the Great Tribulation. So again, this is pointing towards the end. And this good news of the reign shall be proclaimed in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end shall come. So again, Yeshua is making clear that this is speaking of the days of the end as well. Like, there is a gospel going out. It ain't the real one at the minute. This is the broad brushstrokes. I do believe that in the last 10, 20 years, the true gospel is starting to come through. People are waking up. Now, when you see the abomination that lays waste, or the abomination of desolation in King James English, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, set up in the set apart place, he who reads, let him understand. This statement was not in Luke 21. Now, Yeshua is pointing to the prophecies of Daniel, the abomination that lays waste, or the abomination of desolation. Note that verse 15 is in the context of verse 14. Why is this important? Because verse 14 is speaking of when the good news of the kingdom, the true gospel, has gone to all four corners of the earth, and then the end shall come. It's in that context that you should. What I'm saying is, Yeshua is putting the abomination of desolation in the context of end times. This will be important as we go further, because some people like to make this about 70 AD. Then let those who are in Yehudah flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not come down to take whatever out of his house, and let him who is in the field not turn back to get his garment. So now notice that this idea of those in Judea to flee the mountains, in Luke 21, it made it about 70 AD, but in Matthew 24, he's linking it to the abomination of desolation. Now, this is why people will say that the abomination of desolation was fulfilled in 70 AD. But again, like, we're talking end times here. Again, remember the cyclical nature of these things. And woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing children in those days. In what days? In the days of the abomination of desolation. Now, Yeshua, when he's quoting this, he's implying that you already understand the prophecy of Daniel. He's saying this to a people that already understand what that is speaking of. You know, hence why it says, let he who reads, let him understand. I.e., you're supposed to understand what this is speaking of. And pray that your flight does not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. Yeshua says that when the abomination of desolation is seen, then those in Judea are to flee. Now, again, remember what I said earlier. Even if you have a basic understanding of prophecy, you know that Jerusalem is not a great place to be during the Great Tribulation. It's probably the last place you want to be. So it would make sense that Yeshua is saying flee. Now, again, remember, Luke 21 made it more about 70 AD, but in Matthew 24, it's clearly being linked to the abomination of desolation and being put in context of end times. Again, we'll look at Daniel, which will further strengthen this. This cannot be speaking of when Titus and his army destroyed the temple in 70 AD. It cannot be. And you just need to use some simple logic to do this. The war between the Romans and Judea started in 66 AD. And the siege, so there was the war going on for 66 AD. And notice, and it really culminated in 70 AD. So for a period of 4 years, the Jews were pushing back the Roman invasions. again, remember what Yeshua said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, run, run. But so now, yeah, so, and in the lead up to 70 AD, there was a siege, and that lasted 5 months, and that culminated in the destruction of the temple. Now, the siege and it went from Jerusalem, and it took Rome 5 months to slowly make their way further and further in. By the times the Romans were stood in the temple courts, there was no chance left to flee. In fact, for 5 months prior to the destruction of the temple, you couldn't flee. Why? Because there was a siege. Jerusalem was literally surrounded, and anyone that tried to leave was cut down by the Romans. Now, why is this important? Because some people will say that when Titus and his armies finally got into the temple courts, which was at the end of the 5-month siege, we have history that tells us that Titus set up a statue in the temple and then in the courts, and people will say, see, that's the abomination of desolation. If that's true, Yeshua's lying to us. Or he's giving us false hope. Because what did he say? When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, flee. You cannot say this is when Titus and his armies got into the temple courts and set up camp, basically, and put up the statue. Because, like, even before they got near the temple, you couldn't flee. Therefore, does that make sense? If the abomination of desolation is speaking of 70 AD, Yeshua is giving you false hope. It's too late to flee. Because even, like, again, go do some homework on how the destruction of Jerusalem happened. It was brutal, but for 5 months, the Roman armies were stuck outside the Jerusalem wall, and slowly they were able to come in, and like 1 minute Rome would win, and then they would get pushed back again, and it was back and forth, back and forth. I mean, this took time. So by pure logic, this cannot be speaking of 70 AD, because if not, Yeshua's words are pointless. Yeshua is saying, when you see this, you've got time to run. And that wasn't the case in 70 AD. Also, the temple was no longer valid after the death of Messiah. Remember what we covered at the end of last part? In the fulfillment of Daniel's 70 weeks, Yeshua put an end to the sacrifices. Now, again, remember that the sacrifices continued going on after that, but in their terms of being acceptable before the Father. Remember that Daniel's 70 weeks pointed to, what was it all about? Everlasting redemption and the covering of transgression. And that would be through the cutting off of Messiah, of the anointed one. And again, even the Talmud states that in the 40 years leading up to the destruction of the temple, the Yom Kippur sacrifice was never accepted. So again, because the very nature of the abomination of desolation is that it desecrates something that is set apart, and set apart to Elohim. Now, problem. Are people seeing the problem, especially that now we are the temple? I hope this is making sense. Right. Okay, so let's go back to what we're saying. So yeah, pray that your flight does not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. You know, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, flee. Cannot be of 70 AD. Again, this points to the cyclical nature of these verses, because in Luke 21, it's kind of weighted more towards the 70 AD, but in Matthew 24, it's now weighting it more towards the end of days. For then there shall be great distress, a great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world unto this time, nor shall ever be. So again, this is quoting the book of Daniel here. And what did we read about the great tribulation? It will be a time as no other. And if those days were not shortened, no flesh will be saved. But for the sake of the chosen ones, those days shall be shortened. If anyone then says to you, look, here is the Messiah, or there, do not believe. For false messiahs and false prophets shall arise, and they shall show great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the chosen ones. I mean, this is going to be, you can read it both ways. Are they going to be true? Like, are they going to be real signs and wonders, like real miracles? Or are they going to be like pomp and circumstance, so to speak? You know, I tend to lean that these will be real miracles performed to lead people astray from the truth. See, I have forewarned you. So if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Look, he is in the inner rooms. Do not believe. For as lightning comes from the east and shines to the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So everyone will see it. There won't be this thing, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? Like, the world will know. Remember what it said, that the heavens shall recede like a scroll. I mean, whatever that looks like, that's going to be incredible. For wherever the dead body is, there the vultures shall be gathered together. And immediately after the distress of those days, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give its light, and the stars shall fall from the heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Again, so remember when in Luke 21, it was speaking of the powers of heaven being shaken. Cross-reference it to Matthew 24. It's telling you this has to be at the end of days, because it's immediately after the great distress, the great tribulation. This is why the preterist argument falls through, because you have to ignore the book of Daniel, you have to ignore the book of Revelation. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is some validity to their arguments. Yes, there's a fulfillment to 70 AD, but that's not the grand finale. And then the sign of the Son of Adam shall appear in the heaven, and all the tribes of the earth shall mourn, and they shall see the Son of Adam coming on the clouds of the heaven with power and much esteem. And again, this is actually referenced in the book of Zechariah, that all the tribes shall mourn. I mean, this is when Zechariah says that Yah shall come. This is when he splits the Mount of Olives in two. And he shall send his messengers with the great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather his chosen ones from the four winds, from the one end of the heavens to the other. Again, this is another reason why the preterist argument falls through. We didn't have angels gathering people from all ends of the earth at 70 AD. Yeshua is putting the abomination of desolation at the end times. To me, it's fairly clear. Now, Yeshua is referencing the book of Daniel. We've already established this cannot be speaking of Daniel 9, because Daniel 9 was about the atoning work of Messiah. It was about the atoning work. The only way that this can be speaking of Daniel 9 is the fact that Jerusalem got destroyed, but nothing else. Remember the switcheroo that people have done with Daniel 9. However, Daniel 11 actually corroborates the abomination of desolation occurring at the end times. And I believe that this is what Yeshua is referencing, not Daniel 9. He's referencing Daniel 11. So, we're going to look at Daniel 11. The thing is Daniel 10, 11, and 12 are one oratory. They're one piece of work. There shouldn't be any chapter breaks, basically, is what I'm saying. So you need to bear in mind Daniel 10 and Daniel 12 when you're looking at Daniel 11. Does that make sense? Knowing this helps us understand the timing of the events foretold in Daniel 11. Because a lot of people may have heard that Daniel 11 was speaking of the lead up to the Maccabean revolt. But Daniel 10 and 12 would beg to differ. Okay? So, we're going to look a bit at Daniel 10 first. We're going to look a little bit at Daniel 12. And then we'll look at the main points of Daniel 11. In the 3rd year of Koresh, or Cyrus, sovereign of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. And the word was true, and the conflict great. And he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 weeks of days. I did not eat desirable food and meat and wine, and did not come into my meat and wine did not come into my mouth. And I did not anoint myself at all till the completion of 3 weeks of days. And on the 24th day of the first new moon, now, what's that on the heels of? When's unleavened bread? It's from day 15 to day 23. So it's literally off the heels of unleavened bread. Do you think that Daniel's been getting the leaven out of his house? Right? And it's really interesting that at the conclusion of unleavened bread, on the day following the conclusion of unleavened bread, Daniel's being given great revelation here. I cannot notice the thematic link between removing the leaven, mourning and humbling oneself, and being given revelation. Then I lifted my eyes and looked and saw a certain man dressed in linen, whose loins were girded with the gold of Uphaz, and his body was like beryl, and his face like the appearance of lightning, and his eyes like torches of fire, and his arms and feet like polished bronze in appearance, and the sound of his words like the sound of a crowd. Now, Revelation 1 actually tells us who Daniel was having a vision of. So let's quickly read that. So this is John saying, and I turned to see the voice which spoke to me. And having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, or 7 menorahs, in the midst of the 7 lampstands, one like the son of Adam, dressed in a robe down to the feet and girded about the chest with a golden band. And his head and hair were white as wool and as snow, and his eyes as flames of fire. Now Daniel said eyes like lightning. In the Hebrew, fire and lightning and stuff are linked thematically. And his feet like burnished brass, as if refined in a furnace, and his voice is the sound of many waters. And in his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was as the sun, shining in its strength. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. And he placed his right hand on me, saying, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. And I became dead, and see, I am living forever and ever. Amen. And I possess the keys of Sheol and of death. So without a shadow of a doubt, this is Yeshua. Now, this is who Daniel is having a vision of. Yeshua. You could say he's getting the precursor to the revelation of Messiah. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, and they ran away to hide themselves. So I was left alone when I saw this great vision, and no strength remained in me, for my comeliness was destroyed in me, and I retained no strength. But when I heard the sound of his words, but I heard the sound of his words, and while I heard the sound of his words, I was stunned, lying with my face to the ground. And see, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my knees and on the palms of my hands. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly appreciated, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. And while he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling. I mean, just as an aside, people that say that, you know, oh, they've seen angels and they have visits from God all the time, and like they brush it off like it's just some light thing. I mean, Daniel was trembling. he could, you know, he was flat on his face. Anyway, and I have come to make you understand what is to befall your people in the latter days, for the vision is yet for days to come. Now, the phrase for in the latter days is be'acharit hayamim. Now, cast your mind back to when we concluded the Torah cycle. We looked, the final part, we called it the latter days, didn't we? And we saw this phrase, acharit hayamim. And it was always pointing towards the end of days. To, you know, that there is a judgment in the end of days, and that there will be retribution in the latter days, and so forth. So the angel is telling Daniel, this is for the latter days. What you are about to hear is for the latter days. If that's not enough proof, let's now jump to Daniel 12, the other side of the Daniel sandwich, as it were. Now, at that time, Michael shall stand up, the great head who is standing over the sons of your people. And so at that time, at what time? At the time of what's just happened in Daniel 11, okay? Because look, this is Daniel 12:1, and it's saying that at that time, i.e. in the days of Daniel 11, Michael shall stand up, the great head who is standing over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of distress or tribulation such as never was since there was a nation until that time. This is what Yeshua was referencing in Matthew 24. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth wake up, some to everlasting life, and some to reproaches, everlasting abhorrence. And those who have insight shall shine like the brightness of the expanse, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Again, corroborating that this is clearly speaking of the end of days. But you, Daniel, hide the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall diligently search, and knowledge shall increase, or the knowledge of his ways shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked and saw two others standing, one on this bank of the river and on the other on that bank. And one said to the man dressed in linen, i.e. to Yeshua, who was above the waters of the river, how long until the end of these words? And I heard the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, and he held up his right hand and his left hand to the heavens, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for an appointed time, appointed times, and a half a time. And when they have ended scattering the power of the set-apart people, then all these shall be completed. And I heard, but I did not understand. So I said, my master, what is the latter end of these matters? The latter end. Again, the phrase here is ma acharit ele. What is the latter end? Acharit, again. So this is speaking of the acharit hayamim, the latter days. Even Daniel is saying, what's the latter end of all this? And he said, go, Daniel, for the words are hidden and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be cleansed and made white and refined, but the wrong shall do wrong, and none of the wrong shall understand. But those who have insight shall understand. Now, this is a really cool statement here, because I've cross-referenced this to one of my favorite verses in Scripture, Jeremiah 30:24. The burning displeasure of Yah shall not turn back until he has done and established the purposes of his heart. In the latter days, you shall understand it. Now, those of you, I covered this in the Rod of Elohim teaching. Jeremiah 30 and Jeremiah 31 are one oratory, and they speak of the scattering and regathering of the houses of Israel, and how Israel, all 12 tribes, will be placed back in the land, and then comes the renewed covenant, the fulfillment of the renewed covenant. So again, this idea of those who have insight shall understand. In the latter days, acharit hayamim, these are end time statements. Daniel 10 and 12 clearly put the contents of Daniel 11 at the end of time. Clearly. Go read it in your own time. Daniel 10, 11, and 12 are one written piece. There's no breaks. And Daniel 10 and 12 are very clear that this is the end of days. This means that Daniel 11 must be read in that light. Absolutely must be read in the light that this is in the context of the end of days. Some will ascribe the events of Daniel 11 to the lead up to the Maccabean revolt. Now, I'm going to say this. If you follow it, there is a lot of similarities. You know, that you read of Alexander the Great, and, you know, his kingdom was divided up between his 4 generals. And so people have ascribed this to the lead up to the Maccabean revolt. And there is historical application. I would say very much how, like, Yeshua's words have historical application to 70 AD, but there's also some points that are clearly speaking of the end of days, i.e., you know, signs in the heavens and great earthquakes and pestilence and, you know, everyone seeing the Son of Man coming in the sky. That didn't happen in 70 AD. Again, the lead up to the Maccabean revolt is not the time of the end, nor that of the resurrection. Daniel 12 clearly speaks resurrection, that it will be in the days of Daniel 11 that a resurrection will occur. So even if there is historical application, that's not the fulfillment of it. The other reason here's the other reason we know this is not the fulfillment of it. Daniel 11 speaks of the abomination of desolation. Yeshua in Matthew 24 says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, that means it hadn't happened by the very fact that Yeshua was saying it's yet to occur. People will say, oh, but in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, it calls it the abomination of desolation. It's like historical application, maybe, but Yeshua said that it's yet to occur. I'm going to believe my Messiah's words over this. It's yet to occur, which means that whatever happened in the Maccabean revolt was not the fulfillment of the abomination of desolation. I know this is going to trigger some people. But again, like, take the scripture at face value. Daniel 10 and Daniel 12 clearly put Daniel 11 at the end of days. Yeshua in Matthew 24 said that in his day, it hadn't occurred yet, which is it's about 150 to 200 years after the Maccabean revolt. So I'm sorry to stir the pot. Okay, Daniel 11. We're not going to read Daniel 11. It's a really long chapter, a very long chapter. Daniel 11 consists of a series of events, and they consist of like alliances between kingdoms and, treachery. So one kingdom screws over another kingdom. This guy marries this guy's daughter, and it's all deceit. There's wars, and it just lists a series of events that people have ascribed to the lead up to the Maccabean revolt. But again, the Maccabean revolt is not the end of days, and I'm yet to see a resurrection occurring around that time. So we're going to read the main points, okay, that really go around the abomination of desolation. Then he shall return. So the he, I don't have time to get into this, but this is essentially your little horn. Your anti-Messiah, your antichrist, this is this individual. I don't have time to show you all the cross-referencing. Then he shall return to his land with much supplies, and his heart shall be against the set-apart covenant. And he shall act, and he shall return to his land. Notice it says he is not against religion. He is against the set-apart covenant. There's a lot of religions out there that do not have the set-apart covenant. In fact, all of them do not have the set-apart covenant. Only the true faith has the set-apart covenant in it. But this is key to understand, especially with some of the things that, that Curtis will be kind of speaking of in the soon coming future. But yeah. And at the appointed time, he shall return and go toward the south. But it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships shall come from Kittim, shall come against him, and he shall lose heart and shall return in rage against the set-apart covenant. And he shall, so again, notice, it's not against religion. It's against the set-apart covenant. Look, what is the set-apart covenant? Especially in the end of days. Think about this. And he shall act, and he shall return, and he shall consider those who forsake the set-apart covenant. So this individual is going to consider, he's going to accept, he's going to work with those who forsake the set-apart covenant. In fact, have I got this as a point? But do we read of a great falling away? Does Paul speak of a great falling away? And in fact, he mentions it in the context of quoting Daniel. Again, so notice that this individual, or the anti-Messiah, is against the set-apart covenant. where did the covenant used to be written? You know, in ancient Israel, the covenant was written on stone tablets, was it not? Where were the tablets of stone kept? They were kept in the Ark of the Covenant, right? Where was the Ark of the Covenant kept? In the Holy of Holies, in a physical tabernacle or a physical temple. That's where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. So the covenant was inside a physical temple or a physical tabernacle. Where is the covenant being written now? Because Paul says it's not being written on stone tablets anymore. Jeremiah says it's not being written on stone tablets. Where is it being written? On our heart. The covenant is being written on our heart. In fact, this is the very promise of the renewed covenant, that his spirit will write his ways, the Torah, the ketubah, on our hearts. What is the dwelling place of Elohim now? Again, what did we cover at the end of last week? We are the dwelling place. So just as there was a physical temple with a physical Holy of Holies, with a physical ark, with some physical stone tablets, with a covenant or ketubah written on them, now we as living stones are the temple, which means that your heart is essentially the tablets, which means that you are essentially an ark holding the covenant of Elohim, and that we collectively are the dwelling place. Now, why is this critical to understand? Because this individual is against the set apart covenant, not religion, not against the temple. Look, where does it say he's against the temple? It doesn't. Again, if you're going to take Daniel 11 and put he's against the temple, you're inserting that because something is in the house and it ain't the covenant. So again, like, look, we're the dwelling place. The covenant's written on our hearts, or hopefully being written on our hearts. This individual is against the set apart covenant. And we've already established that this is in the end of days. Daniel 12 clearly tells you it's in the 1260 days, the 42 months. And notice he returns and he considers or favors or works with those who forsake the set apart covenant. Again, are we told of a great delusion? Are we told of a great falling away? Are we told of people thinking they're doing Elohim's work and they'll kill us? Yeah, do we hear of a great falling away in the end times? Look, this is why it's critical to understand what the covenant is, where it's being written, what is the temple. You know, Paul understood this. This is why he said, you, pointing to the body, you are the naos, not the, and remember, he used the word that doesn't have to be a physical edifice. It just meant something that is consecrated. Let's keep going. And strong ones shall arise from him and profane the set apart place. Now, this is where people say, see, Michael, this is the physical temple. They're going to profane the physical temple and they're going to take away that which is continual. Okay, we'll get to that. But again, this is why it's so, so critical to understand A, when Daniel 11 is set, B, what the covenant is, and B, what the set apart place is in the days of where Daniel 11 shall occur. They shall profane the set apart place and take away that which is continual and set up the abomination that lays waste. Boom, there it is. People say, you know, there's going to be some kind of physical temple and blah, 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 blah. The ISR translation, man, does it butcher this by saying that which is continual. I mean, I like the ISR, but this one, it really butchered it. The Hebrew word here for that statement is tamid. It literally means daily, the daily, and it's referring specifically to the daily sacrifice, the morning and evening daily sacrifice, okay? Now, what is the only set apart place post the resurrection of Messiah? Because Daniel 11 is putting this at the end of days. And we know that at the end of days, there's only one legitimate temple, and that's the body of Messiah. That's the only legitimate one. It's the only one that can be profaned. Look, here's the thing. Like, people say, look, that he's going to desecrate a physical temple. For it to be desecrated implies it needs to be set apart in the first place. If it's not acceptable before Elohim, it's not set apart. Therefore, it cannot be desecrated. I mean, do you see what I mean? This is why this futurist interpretation of Daniel and this idea of a physical temple and stuff, that's the fulfillment of prophecy, unwittingly takes something that is not sanctified and by logic makes it that Elohim accepts it. Anyway, what is the daily sacrifice that comes forth from the body of Messiah? Are we told of spiritual sacrifices? I've done teachings on this before. Our praises, our prayers, our good works, our brotherly love, our charity to other brothers, our very life is a sacrifice that we're supposed to lay on the altar. Paul calls himself an offering to be poured out, like a drink offering. Your service is a daily sacrifice. But anyway, the very next verse tells us that it actually tells us it's the body of Messiah being profaned. People say, look, Michael, it's speaking of a physical temple. Let's read the very next verse. And by flatteries or by words or deceits, maybe what do we read of? That people shall heap upon themselves teachers tickling the ears. By flatteries, he shall profane those who do wrong against the covenant. But the people who know that Elohim shall be strong and shall act. The very next verse is telling you that the profaning of something set apart is a group of people, and it's those who do wrong against the covenant. Now, let's go back to this. Look, verse 28, his heart is against the set apart covenant. Verse 30, he shall return in rage against the set apart covenant, and shall act and return and consider those who forsake the set apart covenant. To forsake the set apart covenant means you need to have had it in the first place. Keep it in context. So this anti-Messiah against the set apart covenant, he's considering those who forsake the set apart covenant, and then strong ones from this individual shall arise from him and profane the set apart place. Our Brit tells us that this is the body of Messiah. Take away the daily sacrifice and set up the abomination that lays waste. For it to be an abomination that desecrates, the thing needs to be holy in the first place. A building that is not accepted by Elohim cannot be defiled. It's just a building. And then it tells us that by flatteries, by words, by ear tickling, he shall profane those who do wrong against the covenant. These are the ones he's considering that are forsaking the set apart covenant. What did Yeshua say? There'll be many false prophets and many false messiahs, leading many astray, so much so that they'll even lead astray the elect, if possible. When the creator of heaven and earth is saying this delusion is going to be great, heed those words. And those of the people who have insight shall give understanding to many, and they shall stumble by sword and by flame, by captivity and by plundering for many days. Again, what was Yeshua referencing in Matthew 24? What did Daniel 12 say? And when they stumble, they shall be helped, a little help, and many shall join them by flatteries. And some of those who have insight shall stumble to refine them and to cleanse them and to make them white until the time of the end. For it is still for an appointed time. So even Daniel 11 is telling you it's until the time of the end. And the sovereign shall do as he pleases, and exalt himself and show himself to be great above every mighty one, and speak incredible matters against the El of mighty ones. So it's literally speaking, he's speaking against the God of gods, the Lord of lords. That's what it might be confusing there because of the translation. And shall prosper until the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been decreed shall be done. But it's telling you, this king, this sovereign, he shall prosper until the wrath has been accomplished. When's the wrath? Okay, verse 36, there's a lot going on there. We're going to break each statement down of verse 36 to show that this is clearly, without a shadow of a doubt, speaking of end times of yet to come. So let's look at this idea. The sovereign shall do as he pleases. He shall exalt himself and show himself to be great above every mighty one, right? Paul, in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 3 says, let no one deceive you in any way, because the falling away is to come first, and the man of lawlessness is to be revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called Elohim, or that is worshipped. Notice the direct correlation here. So that he sits as Elohim in the dwelling place of Elohim, showing himself that he is Elohim. Though again, the word there is neos, not hieron. Hieron, or yeah, hieron is referring to the physical building. Neos is referring to the set apart place, something that is sanctified. In the days of Paul, he's saying that, remember he says, you are the neos of Elohim. So Paul is quoting Daniel 11 and putting it to the man of lawlessness, and he's saying that he shall sit in the dwelling place, in the neos of Elohim, in the body of believers, i.e. the great falling away. This individual will sit and deceive, and he will consider those who forsake the set apart covenant, as Daniel 11 said. I hope people are starting to connect the dots. Let's look at the next statement. He shall speak incredible matters against the El of mighty ones. So the Lord, the God of all gods, Elohim, yeah. And shall prosper until the wrath has been accomplished. Let's follow this thread throughout Scripture quickly. Daniel 7. Then I desired for certainty concerning the fourth beast. Look, everyone in Christendom and even Judaism agrees that the fourth beast is yet to come. It's like going to be the last beast, which was different from all the others, very fearsome, with its teeth of iron and its nails of bronze, which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the rest with its feet. And concerning the 10 horns that were on its head, and of the other horn that came up, before which 3 fell. This horn, which had eyes and a mouth, which spoke great words. Notice the great words. This is, by the way, cross-referencing this to Daniel 7 is how you know that the king spoken of in Daniel 11 is the little horn of Daniel 7, which is the beast of Revelation, but whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was looking, and this horn was fighting against the set-apart ones. Do you think that the set-apart ones have the covenant written on their heart? Interesting. And was prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came. And right ruling was given to the set-apart ones of the Most High, and the time came, and the set-apart ones took possession of the reign. Daniel 11, when cross-referenced to Daniel 7, is clearly saying that this is in the lead-up to the Ancient of Days coming, which means that when Yeshua is saying in Matthew 24, the abomination of desolation, it definitely wasn't 70 AD. It's yet to come. This is what he said. The fourth beast is the fourth rain on the earth, which is different from all the other rains, and it devours all the earth and tramples it down and crushes it. And the 10 horns, the 10 sovereigns from this reign, they shall rise, and another shall rise after them. And it is different from the first ones, and it humbles 3 sovereigns, and it speaks words against the Most High. Again, what was Daniel 11 saying? It speaks high, and it elevates itself above Elohim, and it wears out the set apart ones of the Most High, and it intends to change appointed times and law, and they are given into its hand for a time and times and half a time. Again, putting this in the context of the Great Tribulation. And by the way, it's because of Daniel 7 that Paul calls this one the lawless one. Paul's not plucking this out of thin air. Revelation 13, and I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads names of blasphemy. Now, this is essentially an amalgamation of the 4 beasts found in Daniel 7, but that's another topic. And the beast I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. And he was given a mouth, speaking great matters and blasphemies, and he was given authority to do so for 42 months. This is how you can cross-reference. So the beast of Revelation 13 is the little horn of Daniel 7, which is the king of Daniel 11. Now, when you cross-reference all this together, it has to be in the end of days. This is why Daniel 11 cannot be speaking of the lead up to the Maccabean revolt. This is why it cannot be speaking of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against Elohim to blaspheme his name and his tent and those dwelling in the tent. Now, again, where's the covenant in the tabernacle? This individual is against the set apart covenant. And it was given him to fight with the set apart ones, to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. And all those dwelling on the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life of the slain lamb from the foundation of the world shall worship him. Again, a great falling away. So going back to Daniel 11, look, this king, he speaks incredible matters against the El of mighty ones, and he prospers until the wrath has been accomplished. From what we've covered in Daniel 7 and Revelation, Daniel 11 cannot be historical. I'm sorry. If there's a historical application, that's interesting, but it's not the fulfillment. In fact, I would say the historical application is a red herring that's pulling you away from the truth of the matter. Let's remember what was mentioned earlier in the chapter. And the strong ones shall arise from him and profane the set apart place. What's the set apart place? They shall take away the daily sacrifice of the set apart place, which is us. Set up the abomination that lays waste. And then it tells you by flatteries with words. What words? He's speaking incredible matters against the El of mighty ones. With these words, he shall profane those who do wrong against the covenant. And remember, the one he's considering, the king, is considering those that forsake the set apart covenant. So, we're going to wrap this up. But how will anti-Messiah profane those who had the covenant? Well, first of all, this is telling you it's by flatteries with words. You know, we've just read in few places that he speaks incredible matters. He speaks pompous words. I want to make a connection, and we'll finish on this connection. Genesis 41, speaking of when Joseph was put into power. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since Elohim has shown you all this, there is no one discerning and wise as you. Be over my house, you yourself, and at your mouth all my people shall kiss. Only in the throne I am greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Mitzrayim. And Pharaoh took his seal ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he dressed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, bow the knee. And he set him over all the land of Mitzrayim. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without a word from my mouth, from you, let no man lift his hand or foot in all the land of Mitzrayim. But when all the land of Mitzrayim hungered, and the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, Pharaoh said to all the Mitzrayites, go to Joseph, do whatever he says to you. And all the earth came to Joseph in Mitzrayim to buy grain, because the scarcity of food was severe in all the earth. Now, let's draw a parallel to Revelation 13. And I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads names of blasphemy. And the beast I saw was like a leopard. So we've just read this, but notice this. The dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. In the same way, Pharaoh puts Joseph second in charge. And I saw one of his heads having been slain to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the earth marveled after the beast. So notice the earth is marveling after the beast, this one that the dragon has put into authority. And they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to fight with him? And then it says, there was given to him to get, so here the false prophet basically gives spirit or life to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause to be killed as many who would not worship the image of the beast. And he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark upon their right hand or upon their foreheads, that no one should be able to buy or sell, except that he has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. You're probably, Michael, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to say? Okay, the dragon gave his power to the beast. Pharaoh gave his power to Joseph. So the beast is essentially second in charge in terms of the kingdom of darkness. Joseph was second in charge. Now, Pharaoh wore a crown. What animal was on that crown? Those of you who know your Egyptology, he would have had a snake or a serpent on his crown. There was like that, and there was the serpent. Now notice that the great dragon is also called the serpent of old, right? And then the devil and Satan, who leads the world astray, and he was thrown down to the earth and his messengers with him. And again, in Revelation 20, you know, the angel here, it seizes the dragon, the serpent of old. So the dragon is also called the serpent. What I'm trying to point is that you have the dragon or the serpent giving his power to the beast. You have Pharaoh, who wore a dragon or a serpent, giving all his power to Joseph. Everyone must worship the image of the beast. Pharaoh made everyone bow the knee to Joseph. Everyone. He paraded him around and said, bow the knee. By the way, in Hebrew, the word for bowing and worship is the same. Everybody marveled at the beast, just as everyone marveled at Joseph for being able to save them. One can only buy or sell with the mark of the beast. Joseph controlled all commerce in the earth. It says that the whole earth came to Joseph to buy grain. Are people seeing the similarities here? I believe Joseph is a type and shadow of the anti-Messiah as well. Because look, I know that Joseph is a type and shadow of Messiah, the suffering servant. But you can't deny the similarities here. By the way, I believe this is giving us a hint that the beast, the anti-Messiah, will come from within. It has to. Remember, it comes as, anyway, other discussion. What did the earth go to buy from Joseph? They went to buy grain specifically. What does grain make? It makes bread, right? Now in Amos 8:11 it says, "See, the days are coming, declares the Master Yah, that I shall send out a hunger in the land, not a hunger for bread, nor a thirst for water, but for the hearing the words of Yah. And they shall wander from sea to sea, from north to east. They shall diligently search, seeking the word of Yah, but they shall not find it." What does the anti-Messiah set himself up as? We read it. He sits in the dwelling place, profanes it, i.e. the body of believers, sets himself up as God. He puts himself above all the other gods. If there is a drought from hearing the true word of Elohim, which is the bread of life, do you think the anti-Messiah will have his own bread or grain to offer the world? Do you see? Are people seeing the connection I'm making? Again, how does the little horn or the king profane? By flatteries with words. He speaks pompous, slanderous words, and that's what defiles those who forsake the covenant. Are people seeing the link as to maybe what the abomination of desolation is? What is the temple of Elohim, or the true set apart place? The body of believers. Yeshua said that this delusion would be great. Great. Your creator's telling you it will be great. That even some of the elect may be deceived. Do you think that will profane the set apart place? Again, and where's the covenant written? On our heart? Proverbs 18:8, "The words of a slanderer are like delicacies, and they go down into the inner parts of the heart." Are people connecting the dots? But what comes out of the mouth comes from the heart, and these defile the man. What I'm saying is that this anti-Messiah is going to have his own, he's going to have a counterfeit bread of life, counterfeit grain. And because there will be a drought of hearing the true words of Elohim, he will speak pompous, slanderous words, and that will defile the temple, the naos of Elohim. Remember, and he sets himself up in the naos of Elohim, as Paul says. Not in some physical temple with bricks and mortar. I believe the effect of this is foreshadowed in the Torah. Some of you may remember in part 5, I was freaking out because I made a connection. Let's look at this. We'll finish on this. Exodus 40, "And Yah spoke to Moshe, saying, On the first day of the first new moon, you are to raise up the dwelling place of the tent of appointment. And he raised up the courtyard all around the dwelling place and the slaughter place, and placed the covering of the courtyard gate. And Moshe completed the work. And the cloud covered the tent of appointment, and the esteem of Yah filled the dwelling place. And Moshe was not able to come into the tent of appointment, because of the cloud dwelt on it, and the esteem of Yah filled the dwelling place." Now, Elohim's physical presence came down and filled the tabernacle on the first of Aviv. I mentioned in part 5 that we're going to see the counterfeit of this event when Hasatan is thrown down to earth on Aviv 1 at the start of the Great Tribulation. I believe we're going to see the counterfeit to this. Now, notice that in Exodus 40, you have Yah filling the tabernacle, right? What have I just been implying that the abomination of desolation is? Where does the anti-Messiah sit? In the naos. We are that temple. We are that temple. So this is the counterfeit. What is the covenant and where is it being written? Again, we've gone through this. The covenant is being written on our hearts. And what is the covenant? Or should I say the terms of covenant? The ketubah, the Torah itself. Again, where is that ketubah now being written? The Torah of Elohim, the very promise of the renewed covenant. Now notice here, it says that Moshe was not able to come into the tent of appointment because of the presence of Yah dwelling in here. What I'm saying is that because of the counterfeit, in the counterfeit, the anti-Messiah will sit where? He'll feel the naos. That's how they'll be that's how it will be profaned. The result of that is Moshe, Torah, the covenant, is not able to come into that tent. If we are the tent and an anti-Messiah sits in our heart and dwells in our heart and defiles us, what do you think cannot be written on our heart? Look, this is serious because Daniel 11 is telling us there'll be those that forsake the covenant, which means the covenant was written on their heart and they'll forsake it. And remember, he's profaning people with his words. Are people making the connections? I know it's a lot, but all I'm going to say is this delusion is going to be great. So to wrap up, in conclusion, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Matthew 24 by Yeshua is a future event. It is not spoken of in Daniel 9. It is spoken of in Daniel 11. Daniel 11 is part of Daniel 10 and 12. And those two chapters put Daniel 11 at the end of time. Cross-reference with Daniel 7 and Revelation, end of time. What is the abomination of desolation? It's profaning the true set-apart the set-apart place of Elohim. We are that set-apart place. There's going to be people that are in covenant that will fall for this. It's prophesied. And most people say, oh, it can't be me, it can't be me. What's the true good news? What is the true covenant? Think about this. You can make an argument that those in... okay, don't shoot me. I'm going to paint a broad brushstroke. But you can make the argument that those in lawless Christianity don't have the true covenant, which means what are they falling away from? Do you see what I mean? This is speaking of people falling away from the true faith. That's where the deception is going to occur, not in Buddhism or some kind of lawless Hare Krishna Christianity. Do you see what I mean? This is the seriousness of it. And this, do you think now that if you do not understand what the abomination of desolation truly is, and you're waiting for some temple in Jerusalem, some building in Jerusalem to be defiled, do you think that that could lead astray a few people? Anyway, I hope that's been a blessing. I know I've laid on a lot, and yeah. Amen.